Welcome to Project Planning for Post-Harvest Efficiency, Profitability, and Food Safety. In this section, we're going to jump into post-harvest and produce safety specifically. A lot of people think of a piece of produce or a bin of produce as just something that you've harvested and actually is inert. That is a total misconception. Produce is alive and breathing just like we are. They also, like we, release heat. Maybe not as much, but they do. And of course, they get dehydrated, as you well know. And of course, produce can get sick and can make you sick. And produce can actually die. But remember, it is alive.
In post-harvest handling and storage, one of the things we work to do is keep produce alive as long as possible. And one of the ways we tend to do that is by reducing its temperature. That also helps minimize bacterial growth. The other thing we do is we try to keep surfaces clean to prevent any post-harvest pathogens that will impact product quality from coming into contact with the produce. So there are things we do that are both related to produce safety, but also to post-harvest quality, produce quality. And so I think it's important to manage for both of those and make decisions that benefit both of those.
Mm-hmm. Cool and clean and good flow.
Yeah.
Now, produce safety is not rocket science, as I like to say. Really, what we're doing is looking at the flow of a live product from the field to the pack house, through and out to a customer. And really all that's happening is we're trying to keep the poop away from the produce. This picture actually is not from my car, but a grower that I've worked with, and illustrates the point perfectly. It is fine to have a lot of different activities in similar places, and we really have to think carefully just about how to keep the flows separate and keep contamination from moving from one place to the other.
So, Hans, in this picture, it might be important to remember that separation can happen in space and or time. So that commode could be in the back of that vehicle at some point. The back of the vehicle could be cleaned, and then the produce could be put in there. They wouldn't be separated in space, but they would be separated in space and time.
Yeah, and
that's
actually,
not quite enough space right there.
But actually, I will say that is a very clean commode, as I remember.
Yeah, that's the other point, right?
Yeah.
Well, that leads into the next slide, talking about where does this contamination come from?
A lot of sources. And the most obvious is that humans, we are touching produce all the time, and we're touching lots of other things. So that is an obvious place that contamination can spread when we touch things that have contamination on them, and we then do not wash our hands well enough, or we don't even know that anything's contaminated, and then we go back to work. Contamination also, bacteria, viruses, protozoa live in the soil, and a healthy soil is loaded with them. And produce has roots, grows in the soil, and soil gets on produce. And of course, plants are mostly water, and that water comes from somewhere. Plants are often irrigated, or it's drawn through surface water or potentially groundwater. And of course, wild animals are in the natural environment. Anything from insects or protozoa up to typical pests and larger animals like deer and bear. And of course, buildings, equipment, tools. So if you think about harvesting a head of lettuce, it's probably going to come in contact with at least dozens of contact surfaces on its way to the customer. And all of those things could be a source of contamination.
This slide comes from the Produce Safety Alliance, which is a national curriculum focused on produce safety. And it's a great way of summarizing all the different ways we can potentially have produce become contaminated. The key thing to remember is anything that comes into contact with produce is considered a food contact surface. And this is an example of some of those that we might not necessarily stumble to unless they were presented in a summary way like this.
We're not going to get in too much detail about the specifics of the produce safety rule, and we recommend you take a Produce Safety Alliance grower training if you haven't already, because we're just touching on the basics of it here. This slide talks about some of the conditions that needs to be appropriate in order for bacteria to grow. Bacteria needs some sort of a food source. It's got to be in the right pH range. It takes time, temperature, oxygen, and moisture. All of these, when present, are the perfect opportunity for bacteria to grow, which coincidentally lines up with a lot of pack sheds. There's oxygen in there, there's food or food scraps, there's moisture, warm temperatures, time for it to sit, all things that make food safety an important consideration.
So putting this all together, the key thing is to think about, say, a head of lettuce, from the time that seed goes in the ground, prepping the soil and the seed bed, through cultivation, through harvest, through movement across all the contact surfaces, dunk tanks or whatever they're going through, into pack out containers, into cold storage, and to the customer. If you look through all that flow and look at every contact surface and think about the conditions that are available for bacteria growth, and you think about where the highest risks are, and then make plans to minimize the risk of cross-contamination or bacterial growth.
The other point I'd like to make on this is these are the conditions that bacteria require for growth. They also tend to be the conditions that produce require for growth. There's a certain range in which things will live and grow. Our job when it comes to produce safety, which, by the way, also will help product quality, is addressing these conditions to minimize the conditions that allow for bacterial growth or other post-harvest pathogen growth.
Let's also put on our produce safety risk mitigation glasses. These are glasses that are helpful because you can actually put down markets, you can put down what time of day it is, you can put down all the other pressures and the
weather
things that aren't working well, and you're looking at your operation from a risk perspective, looking at bacterial growth conditions, thinking about contact surfaces, thinking about risk.
Sources of contamination.
Yep, exactly. And that's really the most important thing. And you as a grower are the best person to do that because you really know your operation. And as long as you can stick those glasses on and not take them off and look pretty carefully at your operation, you are the number one person to see those risks, understand what they are, and especially understand how to minimize them.
So Hans, where can we pick up a pair of these glasses?
Oh boy.
I'd say the PSA training is a good place to pick up a pair of these glasses.
I think you're right on. Yeah, these glasses they're actually made by doing some reading, education, attending classes, thinking through, applying an overlay of knowledge about risk and bacterial growth, applying that overlay onto what you know about your operation.
It's easy to sometimes feel like these rules and regulations just come out of nowhere, and a lot of the practices feel, strange or even odd or absurd. There is scientific basis for most of the rules and the practices that are being presented, and a lot of it does come back down to these ideas of what are sources of contamination, and what are the conditions that are required for pathogen growth.
It's really important to understand this stuff and to think about how to reduce stuff. And all this regulation, when you look at it, can be overwhelming. And the most important thing is to stick to the things you know are going to work with your crew and culture, and own this stuff and make it fit into your larger operation in a way that is going to give you other benefits. So it might be organizational systems, it might be cleaning routines, it might be structures for your employees to have some management opportunities that give them the ability to really own production flow efficiency. Overall, produce safety stands the chance of not only reducing risk, but also increasing your efficiency and profitability, which is really what we're after.
Thanks for watching this session of Project Planning for Post-Harvest Efficiency, Profitability, and Food Safety. We hope you're getting a lot out of it and learning things that you can apply to your farm. If you did learn something and do implement something on your farm, let us know. Or if you have a suggestion or a comment of something you've done, we'd love to hear it. So go ahead and comment below or send us an email at producesafety@uvm.edu. Thanks for watching, and I hope you watch the next video.